Hello, and welcome to For Further Review, a conversation after the Murfreesboro City School Board meeting. We have as our guest today, we have Lee Wilkerson, who is the head of Human Resources with the city system, and we have Katrine Stevens, who is the principal at Scales Elementary School. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lee, tonight on the agenda, we had a discussion of tenure, and those teachers' names were read who will be receiving tenure. Could you talk just a little bit about tenure, what it means, maybe a little bit of the history about it?
Yes, tenure is essentially a procedural safeguard against arbitrary dismissal of teachers once they've achieved tenure status. And initially in 1942, the General Assembly passed the continuing contract law, which was a step toward granting tenure. At the time, local boards would often dismiss teachers for political purposes rather than for performance issues. And by 1951, the General Assembly passed the Tennessee Teacher Tenure Law, which essentially provides those teachers with a procedural safeguard to secure their positions unless they're found guilty in a hearing before the Board of Education for one of the 5 issues that you can be dismissed, which are inefficiency, neglect of duty, insubordination, conduct unbecoming a member of the teaching profession, or incompetence.
We hear a lot about licensing and we hear about tenure. Is there a difference between the two?
Yes. The licensure process is handled through the Tennessee State Department Office of Teacher Licensure, and they are in no way involved in the tenure decision. When the General Assembly passed the law, they gave the Board of Education, the local Board of Education, the exclusive authority to grant tenure to teachers. And so essentially, while there is some similarities in terms of the time frame that a teacher moves from an apprentice to a professional license, they are separate entities, because the licensure is a state program, whereas the tenure is a local decision.
Could you talk a little bit about how a person becomes a teacher in Murfreesboro City Schools?
Well, absolutely. A teacher would go through a 4-year degree program and earn a bachelor's degree with endorsement and licensure, eligible for licensure in K through 6, K through 4, any of the licensure programs that we have, as well as the specialty areas, music, art, any of those programs that we have here at Murfreesboro City. Once they finish that degree program, the best thing to do at that point is, first of all, have good grades, love children, and most importantly, to sell themselves in the interview process. When they speak with the principal and they're interviewing, they really need to be able to come across as someone who has a passion for children and is willing to do the hard work that teachers do.
One of the things that we're hearing about is that there might be a shortage of teachers. Are we experiencing that in any areas in Murfreesboro?
In a couple of areas, yes, we are. One of the primary areas is English language learners, ELL teachers, for those students that come into the United States with English as a second language. We have a very dire shortage of those positions across the state. Another area is special education, comprehensive development classrooms. Those very needy children in those classrooms, it's a very tough job, and there's often not enough applicants to fill the positions that we have.
If you had one piece of advice to give someone who's considering becoming a teacher, what would that be?
Look yourself in the mirror and say, do you love children enough to work with them every single day? And are you willing to put those children first in the decisions that you make? I think that's the essential part that a teacher must have.
Well, let's talk with someone who loves children. Katrine, let me ask you this. We talk about tenure. We realize that the principals play a critical role in that process. Could you talk a little bit about teacher evaluation?
First of all, we use the Tennessee Framework for Evaluation and Professional Growth, and that includes many components, both for the teacher and for the administrator, such as planning meetings, evaluations, reflecting meetings, appraisals, and educator information record where they compile assessment data, professional growth, collaborative activities, and really add to their evaluation scope for the administrator. There's self-assessment paperwork for first-year teachers. There's even a unit plan that they have to create and have an evaluation come out of that experience. So it's a fairly comprehensive program. The Tennessee Framework has very specific criteria domains and standards of growth and expectations, whether you are in your first year of teaching or you are a tenured professional license holder.
And tenure comes after 3 years, right? It's given.
That recommendation comes after 3 years.
Right. Okay. What is the role of the principal in that whole process?
First of all, we have to assure that we follow the evaluation framework and make sure that for non-tenured teachers, they have 3 complete evaluations within that year that they are employed each year. We need to make sure that we provide appropriate feedback, that a future growth plan is created and is followed through upon the following year. The administrator really has to look for that to see some growth and some adjustment in a particular area that's been noted. There is a lot of data collection. The principal's responsible to make sure that is all correct and gathered and then evaluated so that a summative can be completed on a teacher. That summative, in essence, gives grades, if you will, for lack of a better word, to a teacher in certain areas. And as I previously noted, the state is very specific on what the expectations are for those grades at each year.
When you go into a classroom for an evaluation, what are you looking for?
There are so many things. First of all, prior to that evaluation, you have met in a pre-conference of sorts, and so you as the administrator know the objectives that are going to be addressed in this lesson. You want to see, is that actually what is happening in the classroom? You want to see, are different things happening for different learners? We call that differentiated instruction. If it's appropriate for that lesson, you want to see research-based strategies employed. Is technology being utilized? You want to see management of children, resources, materials, possibly instructional support management as well, and not to mention clear communication, whether it's verbal, nonverbal, written. And so in that time, you are really taking in everything, including what does that room look like, what does it feel like, how is it organized.
Let me ask you this. I think that a lot of times we assume that after a person acquires tenure, that's really the end of their evaluation, that they're left alone and they retreat in their classroom and do whatever they do. Is that true, or does that evaluation continue in some way?
That is not true. Once someone has earned tenure and, as Mr. Wilkerson noted, advanced to a professional license, they will be evaluated formally every 5 years, but informally under what we call performance assessment 2 times in that 5-year period. So really, they're being evaluated 3 times out of a 5-year period, whether it's performance assessment or formal. And so they are continuing with future growth plans. Every teacher, whether it's under performance assessment or formal, has a future growth plan that they are working on. As the administrator, that following year, you are following up on that, seeing how that is going, preparing for the next time we observe. Something that's different between non-tenured and those that are tenured professional license holders, they have, instead of 3 evaluations, they have 2. They do not have to complete a unit. So there might be a bit of a reduction in some of the experiences, but they are held accountable and they are certainly evaluated very regularly.
Do you see any changes in teacher evaluation in the future? We've recently heard about Race to the Top, and we found out that Tennessee, of course, is a finalist, and there were laws constructed really in part to be able to access that funding. What kinds of changes do you see in teacher evaluation in the future?
Part of the change that will be happening as it stands now with Race to the Top, half of a teacher's overall evaluation will come from assessment data. 35% of that half will be related to growth of students, what we typically call value-added or TVOS. The remaining 15% of that half right now is being determined by a 15-member task force that is looking at what other components should teachers be evaluated on in addition to the growth element. So that's 50% of a teacher's evaluation coming up with Race to the Top. The other 50% will be looked at with the teacher and principal to collaboratively determine what we might be looking at. It could include classroom management, teaching strategies, an array of things. So it's certainly going to change because the assessment piece is going to be quite large and very specific to how a teacher is evaluated. Additionally, as it stands now, it appears that principals will evaluate on a yearly basis. Now, the details of that we don't quite know, but it looks like evaluation is going to be pretty heavy for all of us.
Yeah, I think you're right. From what I'm understanding, it will be principals and teachers that are evaluated annually, so we will have quite a bit of work to do.
We will.
Sure. Let me ask you the same question I asked Lee. What's the best advice that you can give to a person who's thinking about going into teaching?
Loving children is first. Having a sincere desire to do whatever it takes to create success for a child personally and academically is essential. And whatever it takes is just that. And that requires a huge commitment of time, a huge commitment to learning so that you can better assist your children. And in doing so, that huge commitment, you will be a difference maker, not just for one, but for many. You have to have that large commitment and be ready to make it, whatever it takes. Whatever time, whatever effort, whatever energy, whatever it takes.
Well, thank you two very much for being here. We thank you for joining us. As you can see, in Murfreesboro City Schools, we are focused on children, and we thank you for your continuing support, and we'll see you next month.